For the final segment of this episode, we're going to try another new segment, something we kind of brainstormed. We're calling Top Teens. All right, so basically the premise here is that one thing that movie lovers enjoy doing is making lists. And you're always seeing these lists online, you know, top 10 this, top 5 that, top 100 this. And the problem with these lists is that a lot of times, if it's like the top 5 or top 10, it's the same things that you've heard over and over. So we just thought it'd be kind of interesting to do a list where we don't give you the top 10. We don't even give you the top 12. We give you the top teens, 13 through 19, and that's it. Now, obviously, when we try to brainstorm for what would be a good segment to do right now, I thought, well, we could do something about sports movies. Because right now, if you're a sports fan, it's actually a really interesting time of the year. It might even be the best time of the year to be a sports fan. You've got March Madness just wrapped up. Virginia won the college basketball title. You've got the NBA and the NHL playoffs just getting underway. You've got the Major League Baseball season just starting off. Very interesting there. And if you're a football fan, you've also got the draft coming up, and you've got free agency, and you got guys, you know, signing big deals. Actually, no, you don't have free agency, but you do have guys signing really big deals right now, like Russell Wilson. All right, so that's going to be our subject for this particular segment. Now, obviously, because this is top teens, we're not going to include movies like Raging Bull, which is flat out one of the greatest movies of all time, sports or otherwise. We're not going to include documentaries like Hoop Dreams, or we're not going to include Rocky or Breaking Away or Rudy, because obviously any list of great sports films is going to have those movies. We're going to try to find, you know, the deep cuts or the deeper cuts that maybe you not necessarily have heard of or have come across, but you know, you get to hear about something new. All right, so for our first teen, we're going to talk about movie number 13. That is 8 Men Out by John Sayles. It's a movie that's been out, I guess came out probably about almost 30 years ago, so a lot of you younger folks out there might have never even heard of it. It's a film about the 1919 Chicago White Sox. It's based on a true story. The White Sox went down in infamy as the Black Sox because they were a team who were so mad at their cheap owner, Charles Comiskey, that they actually conspired to throw the 1919 World Series. And as a result, they were banned from baseball. And among their ranks was a player named Shoeless Joe Jackson, who to this day still has the second highest batting average in Major League history. And in what would otherwise be a Hall of Fame career, he is still not in the Hall of Fame because of his role in throwing the World Series. Again, directed by John Sayles and starring a young John Cusack. It was a great cast, actually. And fantastic film. If you haven't heard of it or seen it, definitely try to check it out. I believe it's on Blu-ray domestically. All right, so for number 14 is another one that you know, you might have some people say, oh, is that even a sports film? It's Rounders by John Dahl. It's a film about playing cards, you know, playing poker. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some people out there who would say, well, you know, playing poker is not a sport. Except, you know, if that's the case, then why did ESPN spend the better part of the 90s showing it on ESPN2 and getting actually really good ratings? Because there are sports elements to it, but because it's not your typical baseball, football, basketball, it doesn't have the same beats that you normally get. And this is a great movie because it's an awesome early performance by Matt Damon. You've also got a great cast with Ed Norton and John Malkovich. And of course, John Dahl is a fantastic filmmaker of the 90s. He made movies like The Last Seduction and Red Rock West. Some really awesome neo-noir films. Yeah, John Dahl. There you go. All right. For number 15, we're going to go with a film from the 70s, a film that it's actually, I'd be surprised if a lot of you guys actually know about this one. It's called Bingo Long's Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. This is a film, and to my knowledge, it's one of the only films that really talks about the experience of players in the Negro Leagues as they used to what was called barnstorming the country back then. In the 30s and 40s, if you were an African American baseball player, the teams, they would get together in these old beat up jalopies, and they would sort of drive from town to town, and they would put on these baseball games. And because they weren't allowed to play in the major leagues, there were some very talented players of that era, such as Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, who were denied the ability to play in the majors for many years. I mean, Paige, in his case, eventually made the majors very, very late in his career, but he spent most of his career playing in the Negro Leagues. And so this is a film that really sort of attempts to depict that experience and the experience that those guys had. And it stars Billy D. Williams and Richard Pryor and James Earl Jones. So it's a terrific cast. And it's just a fun movie. It's one of those movies I looked into it to see. There's no Blu-ray release. I believe there's a DVD release. And as far as streaming, I think the only streaming service that had it was like Starz. So it's kind of hard to track down. But it was one of those things where it was a staple on pay cable channels 10, 15 years ago, and I think that's how I saw it. But yeah, definitely worth tracking down if you get a chance. All right, for our top teen installment number 16 is a film by the Safdie brothers. It's called Lenny Cook. It's a documentary. Now, the Safdie brothers are probably best known for their film Good Time with Robert Pattinson. And of course, before that, the work that they did on Heaven Knows What as a film about heroin addicts. But in between those movies, are actually around the time of Heaven Knows What, they did this documentary about Lenny Cook. For those of you that might not be basketball fans, Lenny Cook is a guy that was a high school phenom. Going into his senior year, he was considered the best basketball player in the country. He was very highly recruited. And at that time, I believe you could still go directly from high school into the NBA. And through a series of events, Lenny kind of gets some bad advice and falls in with the wrong crowd, and has a couple of encounters at some basketball camps, including a memorable one with a very young LeBron James that ended up lowering his stock. And he sort of comes across in the film as this sort of star-crossed person who it gives you a look at what becomes of a guy once he's been through that situation where at one point it seems like he's got the world at his feet, and then suddenly through happenstance things just go really horribly wrong. And I don't want to spoil the film, but there's some really nice touches that happen at the end that I thought really lifted this beyond just the sort of thing that you would see in a 30 for 30 documentary, and it transcends that to become like a great work of film art, which is great because the Safdie brothers, again, they are a couple of the biggest rising stars in the film world right now. So it's kind of an interesting look for them to have decided to kind of make this movie at this time. But I think is a decision that worked out really well because I think it's a great film. All right, for our top teen number 17 is a film by Richard Linklater. It's called Everybody Wants Some. All right, now this is a film that I believe kind of was not well served by the fact that when it came out, there was a lot of marketing around the notion that, this is like the sequel to Dazed and Confused. And there was a lot of people that were just looking for like Dazed and Confused Part 2. And, it was not really that. So I feel like it was ill-served by the campaign. But the film is very loosely based off of Richard Linklater's experiences as a college baseball player. I believe he went to Sam Houston State, and he was on the baseball team there, and he hurt his arm. And, at that point, once he couldn't play baseball, he eventually made that metamorphosis into being a filmmaker. But, he mines this territory, which he's actually, although it does, there's kind of one of the storylines in Dazed and Confused relates to, the Wiley Wiggins character playing, Little League. But also, Linklater did Bad News Bears, and so obviously it's a topic that's near and dear to his heart. But just it's one of those movies where there's the camaraderie between the players, and you really get the sense of this is a movie that's coming from the heart, and it's by a guy who's been there, and for him to share those experiences in this movie, and to really sort of nail that dynamic of what it's like, to be those guys, to be on that team. It's a really great movie, and I highly recommend checking it out. All right, rounding out our top teen segment, here's film number 18. It's a documentary called Ring of Fire. It's about the boxer Emil Griffith. This is kind of a low-budget documentary. The production value isn't exactly the greatest, but this is such a fascinating story that I really felt like I had to share it. Griffith was a very popular boxer during the late 50s and early 60s. And he had a fight in which went horribly wrong and resulted in boxing not really being on television for the better part of 20 years. And I don't really want to get into the spoilers of the story, but the reason for things going wrong in the fight have to do with the fact that Emil Griffith was living a sort of a double life, and his unwillingness to acknowledge that is one of the more fascinating elements of the film. And so again, I think I heard recently that it was going to be actually it was going to be made into a narrative film, so that could be interesting. But yeah, the original documentary has my fullest recommendation. Definitely. I think it's kind of hard to see. I believe it came out on DVD. I don't think it's gotten a Blu-ray anywhere. And I think when I looked, I don't think there was really any streaming options. But yeah, if you managed to track it down, I definitely would recommend seeing it. And then finally, for our number 19 entry, I actually cheated and I chose two movies. We've got a tie because they're both about the same person. One is a film called The Great White Hope, which was loosely based on the life of the first black heavyweight champion of the Marquess of Queensberry rule era. That's Jack Johnson. It began as a stage play and was eventually turned into a film starring James Earl Jones. They don't explicitly refer to him as Jack Johnson, but all of the events in the character's life closely mirror the events of Johnson's life. And I'm a person that since I was a teenager, I've been fascinated with Jack Johnson. I just think he's the most incredible, fascinating character, one of the most interesting people in the history of sports. And so my co-entry at number 19 is the Ken Burns documentary, Unforgivable Blackness, about Jack Johnson. As I said, when I was a kid, I would try to find everything that I could on Johnson. I would scour through books looking for any kind of scrap about him. And so when this documentary came out, and I believe it's like a two-part documentary, it's like 3 or 4 hours long, and it was just such a wealth of material in it. It just completely blew me away. I believe it's only available on DVD. I have the DVD. Yeah, if you get a chance to check that out, I can't recommend it highly enough. Definitely give that a look. So that is our top teen segment for this episode. Hopefully we turned you on to some new titles that you might not have normally heard about, and track them down and give them a look and see what you think. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.